The entire church froze when the bride, radiant in her lace gown, turned her sharp smile toward me. She tightened her grip on the bouquet, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "Look at her makeup, it's so cheap, almost embarrassing." Laughter rippled through a few of the guests, like daggers thrown straight into my chest. My cheeks burned, my pulse raced. I had spent the night before trembling in front of a mirror, wiping away tears, terrified I wasn't good enough to stand here. And now, with one cruel sentence, she tried to reduce me to nothing. But then it happened. A voice cut through the mockery, strong and unwavering. A voice I could never mistake. The CEO, the groom, the man everyone in this hall treated like untouchable royalty. Slowly, he rose from his seat at the altar, his eyes never leaving mine. For a moment, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "She's the only beauty I can see here." The words thundered through the church, silencing every giggle, every whisper. Gasps filled the air. The bride's smile shattered, her lips parting in disbelief. Even the priest stumbled over his breath, unsure how to proceed. And me? I couldn't move. My hands trembled as I clutched the hem of my dress, my heart hammering against my ribs. He hadn't just offended me. He had declared me in front of everyone, as if I were the center of his world. For the first time, I realized this wasn't humiliation. This was war, and he had chosen his side. Whispers rippled through the guests, like a storm breaking loose inside the church. The bride's hand trembled as she lowered her bouquet, her face contorted with disbelief. This wasn't the script she had written for herself. She had expected admiration, pity for me, and applause for her cruelty. Instead, she had been stripped bare in front of her own wedding guests. Her perfect image cracked like porcelain, and she didn't know how to piece it back together. The CEO's eyes, however, never left mine. He didn't look at his bride, didn't acknowledge the priest, not even the family members seated in the front row, who were glaring at him in outrage. His gaze pinned me down, steady and unyielding, as though he had just revealed a truth he could no longer hide. My pulse hammered, and I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not from shame anymore, but from the intensity in his stare. The walls of the grand cathedral felt too small to contain it. I wanted to move, to step back, to shield myself from the chaos swirling around me, but my legs refused to obey. Every second dragged out like eternity as the weight of his declaration settled in the room. Some guests turned toward me, their eyes filled with curiosity, judgment, even envy. And yet, in that storm of attention, his words played on a loop in my mind. "She's the only beauty I can see here." It wasn't just a defense. It was a claim, bold and undeniable. And deep down, I knew this moment was about to change everything. The bride finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you embarrass me like this in front of everyone?" she hissed, her painted lips curling into a snarl. She turned toward the CEO, her husband-to-be, desperate for him to retract, to smooth the moment over and restore her shattered pride. But he didn't even glance her way. He stood taller, unshaken, as if her anger was nothing more than background noise compared to the storm inside his chest. I felt every eye on me, some filled with scorn, others wide with fascination. It was unbearable yet intoxicating. My breath came shallow, my palms clammy against the fabric of my dress. A part of me wanted to disappear beneath the pews, vanish from their judgment, but another part, the part that heard the steel in his voice, wanted to rise, to hold my head high and meet their stares. His words had branded me, whether I liked it or not. Then, in one impossible instant, he moved. The CEO stepped down from the altar, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. Each step drew gasps, whispers, a murmur of disbelief spreading like wildfire. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might shatter my ribcage. He stopped in front of me, close enough for me to see the fierce glint in his eyes. The bride's bouquet slipped from her trembling hands, crashing to the floor. And in that charged silence, I realized something terrifying. This was no longer her wedding. With a single sentence, he had shifted the spotlight, and it was now fixed solely on me. The sound of the bouquet hitting the floor still echoed when the bride lunged forward, clutching the CEO's arm as if to pull him back to her side. "This is madness!" she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Her flawless makeup could not mask the tremor in her features, the fear of losing everything in a single moment. But he gently removed her hand, the dismissal sharper than any slap could have been. Gasps swept through the guests like a sudden wind, rattling chandeliers and stirring gossip in every corner. I froze in place, torn between disbelief and panic. My mind screamed that this wasn't real, that any second now someone would laugh, say it was a joke, and the ceremony would resume. But the CEO's unwavering eyes told me otherwise. He wasn't jesting. He wasn't posturing. He was declaring war on expectations, family, and tradition itself, all with me at the center. My heart threatened to collapse under the weight of it, and then with deliberate calm he turned to the audience. His voice carried, low and steady, yet more commanding than the church bells above. "You ask what beauty looks like," he said, his words slicing through the tension. "It's not in painted faces or jeweled gowns. It's in honesty. It's in strength." His gaze returned to me, anchoring me to the ground when I thought I might float away. "And she's the only beauty I recognize here." Murmurs rose like thunder. The bride staggered back, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. The bride's painted mask cracked completely, fury blazing through her tear-glossed eyes. "You dare humiliate me on my own wedding day?" she shouted, her voice sharp enough to pierce the vaulted ceiling. Her family stirred in their seats, faces pale with outrage, but none dared to rise. Their silence was deafening, a silence that only magnified her collapse. She staggered back a step, clutching the pew for balance, but the CEO did not waver. He stood like a fortress, unmovable, unshaken. Whispers spread like wildfire across the rows of guests, each word another spark, threatening to ignite the entire room. Is he leaving her? Who is that woman? What is happening? The questions rained down like stones, every gaze digging into my skin. My body begged me to run, to escape before the weight of their judgment crushed me. But when I glanced at him, his eyes, fierce, unwavering, held me in place. He was daring me to stand my ground, daring me to claim the spotlight he'd forced onto me. And then came the moment no one expected. He reached for my hand, slowly, deliberately, as though every second was meant to be carved into memory. My pulse stuttered, my breath caught, and the world seemed to freeze. Gasps erupted, the bride let out a strangled cry, and the air grew heavy with disbelief. His fingers wrapped around mine, warm, steady, commanding. In that simple gesture, he made his choice clear. He wasn't just defying the bride. He was binding himself to me. The bride's scream shattered the air. "You can't do this. She's nothing but a shadow in your life." Her words were venom, flung like knives, but each one missed its mark. Because at that moment, every eye in the church wasn't on her. They were on us, on him, holding my hand as if it were the most natural, undeniable truth in the world. The tension in the air coiled tighter, like a storm gathering, every guest leaning forward as though the next breath might break them. I tried to pull away, instinct screaming for escape, but his grip only tightened. His voice came low, meant only for me, yet the entire hall seemed to tremble with it. "Don't let go. Not now. Not when they finally see the truth." The conviction in his tone burned hotter than fire, searing away the doubt I'd carried for so long. And suddenly, the whispers around us transformed, no longer judgment, but awe. The impossible was happening before their eyes, and they couldn't look away. Then, In a single decisive move, he faced the priest. "This ceremony does not belong to lies," he declared, voice ringing clear. "If there is to be a vow today, it will be mine to her." Gasps erupted, some voices crying out in protest, others in sheer disbelief. The bride collapsed to her knees, sobbing, while her family rose in outrage. But he didn't falter. He lifted our joined hands high, as though declaring victory in the middle of chaos. And in that instant, with the world falling apart around us, I realized there was no turning back. The church doors slammed open. The sound echoed like thunder, rattling the very air as dozens of heads whipped around. A cold gust swept through the aisle, carrying with it the weight of scandal. Reporters, cameras, flashbulbs exploding in rapid succession, like lightning in a storm. They had been tipped off, and now the chaos unfolding inside the wedding was no longer private. It was about to become headline news. The bride's wails, the groom's defiance, and my presence in the middle of it all were suddenly exposed to the world beyond these walls. I froze, my hand still trapped in his. My reflection flashed back at me from every lens, every angle, magnifying the shame I thought I couldn't bear any longer. But then he stepped forward, shielding me with his body, his expression carved from stone. "Let them see," he said under his breath, his jaw tightening with resolve. His defiance wasn't just for the bride anymore. It wasn't just for the guests. It was for the world. The reporters surged forward, their voices a relentless tide. "Who is she? Is this the end of the wedding? CEO Kim, what is happening?" The questions collided into a roar that nearly swallowed me whole. But instead of answering them, he did something far more dangerous. He pulled me closer until our shoulders touched, our breaths collided, and the cameras caught every second. His next words, though quiet, burned louder than all their noise combined. "If they want a story, then let them witness the truth." The bride's father rose from the front pew, his face flushed with fury, veins standing out at his temple. Chairman Park, one of the most feared names in the business world, now trembling with rage, not from power, but from humiliation. "Enough," he thundered, pointing an accusing finger at me. "This girl, she is nothing. A parasite. Remove her at once." His voice cracked like a whip, and instantly bodyguards surged down the aisle. Their heavy steps echoed against the marble floor, drawing gasps and shrieks from the guests. The church, moments ago sacred, had transformed into a battlefield. I staggered back, panic gripping my chest as the guards approached. But before they could reach me, the CEO moved like a shield, stepping directly into their path. His arm flung wide, forcing them to stop. "Touch her, and you answer to me," he growled, his tone low and dangerous. The silence that followed was suffocating, every breath in the room caught in suspension. The bride, tears streaking her flawless face, screamed from behind her veil, "Father, do something. He's choosing her over me." Her shrill voice pierced the tension, but it was drowned out by the collective gasp when the CEO slowly turned, his gaze cutting through the chaos like a blade. His eyes locked with the chairman's, unwavering, unafraid. "You call her nothing," he said, his words slow, deliberate, meant to wound. "But she is the only one who has ever been everything to me." The cameras clicked furiously, capturing not just a scandal, but a declaration that would shake empires. The silence after his words was deafening. Even the reporters seemed to forget to breathe. The chairman's face darkened, his pride wounded before the entire congregation and the flashing cameras. He took a step forward, his voice trembling with restrained rage. "You would destroy your own future, your legacy for her?" His tone dripped with disbelief, but also fear, the kind that comes from realizing power is slipping through your fingers. The CEO didn't flinch. Instead, he released my hand only long enough to interlace his fingers with mine, deliberately, boldly, for everyone to see. The gesture was small, yet it ignited the room like fire. Gasps rippled across the pews, whispers swelling into a storm. The bride collapsed onto the altar steps, sobbing, her veil trembling as her cries echoed through the hall. Her makeup, once perfect, streaked down her cheeks like melting paint. "Legacy means nothing if it's built on lies," he said, his voice steady, resonating against the marble walls. Then, turning back to me, he brushed a wet strand of hair from my face, the tenderness in the midst of chaos almost unbearable. His thumb lingered near my cheek, as if daring the world to challenge his choice. The cameras snapped, immortalizing the moment, the defiant CEO standing against power, family, and tradition, declaring loyalty not to empire but to me. And in that instant the battle lines were drawn, not just for love, but for everything that came with it. The church doors burst open before anyone could recover from his declaration. A swarm of reporters, tipped off by whispers of scandal, rushed inside, cameras flashing like lightning. The sacred vows of marriage had transformed into the headline of the century. CEO Cho defies his bride. Secret love exposed. Their voices collided in chaos, microphones shoved forward as they shouted for answers. The once pristine ceremony was no longer about holy vows. It was a battlefield of reputation, power, and betrayal. I froze, shielding my eyes from the blinding lights. But the CEO tightened his grip on my hand, anchoring me. "Stay beside me," he whispered, his voice a calm storm against the roaring frenzy. The bride's sobs sharpened, twisting into rage as she rose unsteadily, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You've humiliated me," she screamed, pointing a trembling hand at me. "This is all her fault. She bewitched you." Her words spilled like venom, feeding the hungry cameras, who captured every tear, every shriek. But the true explosion came when her mother, the formidable Madame Huang, stepped forward, her presence commanding the room like a queen entering her throne. Her lips curled into a cold smile as she addressed the press directly. "My daughter has been betrayed," she declared, her voice steel-coated silk. "This girl will regret the day she crossed our family." Her promise wasn't loud, but it dripped with power, echoing louder than the bride's screams. And in that moment, as the flashes captured every trembling breath, I realized this wasn't just about a ruined wedding anymore. It was war. The cameras surged closer, flashes painting the sanctuary in fractured bursts of white. Journalists barked questions. "Is it true you've chosen her? Will the wedding be cancelled?" Their voices colliding in a storm of curiosity and greed. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the marble floor and vanish, but his hand held me firm, unyielding. Then, in a move no one expected, the CEO stepped forward, pulling me into the center of the aisle where everyone could see. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he raised our joined hands high, a public declaration no one could twist. "Yes," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like thunder. "She's the only one I choose." His gaze swept across the press, his own family, the collapsed bride, and finally Madame Huang herself. "And if anyone dares touch her, they will answer to me." The congregation erupted, some in shock, others in admiration, but the scandal was undeniable. The bride shrieked, clawing at her veil. Her humiliation splattered across every camera lens. Madame Huang's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a venomous smile that promised revenge. But the CEO only pulled me closer, his arm shielding me, as if to prove he would fight the world itself if it tried to take me away. For the first time, standing in the spotlight of fury and scandal, I felt something stronger than fear. His defiance gave me courage. And though the world might brand me an intruder, in that moment, under his protection, I felt unshakably chosen. The chaos in the hall sharpened into silence when Madame Huang stepped fully into the aisle, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble. The cameras turned, eager to capture the Iron Matriarch, whose influence stretched beyond business into politics and society itself. She didn't scream like her daughter. She didn't need to. Her presence alone froze the air. "You may think this is brave," she said smoothly, her eyes locked on the CEO, then cutting toward me like blades. "But it is reckless. That girl," she tilted her chin at me with contempt, "will bring ruin, not love. If she remains at your side, Cho Group will collapse within a year. And when it does, the world will not forgive her. They will tear her apart, and no hand of yours will be strong enough to shield her." The press devoured every word, their pens racing. Her tone wasn't fury, it was prophecy, a calculated warning dressed as fact. Guests began whispering, some nodding, others horrified, but all feeding the storm. For a moment, doubt pierced me. Could I truly withstand this? The glare of the cameras, the scorn of high society, the weight of an empire on my shoulders? But before fear could anchor me, the CEO pulled me even closer, his chest firm against my back. His voice thundered, fierce and unwavering. "Then let the world collapse. I'd rather lose an empire than lose her." Gasps ripped through the sanctuary. Even Madame Huang faltered, her mask cracking for a fraction of a second. The cameras didn't miss it. And in that instant, I realized we had crossed a line no one could erase. By dawn, the scandal had already become a wildfire. Every television screen, every newspaper headline, every buzzing notification on a phone screamed our names. CEO Cho chooses mystery woman over bride. Empire at risk. Madame Huang declares war. Reporters swarmed outside the mansion gates, helicopters circling like vultures hungry for the collapse of an empire. Inside, the atmosphere was no calmer. The bride had vanished, spirited away by furious relatives, her humiliation immortalized by photographs that would never fade. Executives rushed through the corridors, their faces pale as ghosts, whispering about stock values, contracts, and foreign investors pulling out. It wasn't just a wedding scandal anymore. It was the kind of fracture that could topple dynasties. And I was at the center of it. Me, the woman who arrived at the ceremony soaked from the rain, who had no designer gown, no aristocratic bloodline, no armor except the hand that now refused to let go of mine. I could feel every pair of eyes in the Cho household stabbing into me, calculating my worth, predicting my failure, daring me to falter so they could devour me whole. But the CEO, no Juno, stood before them all with a steel composure that unnerved even his own board. His hand tightened around mine as he faced the gathering storm. "You want answers," he said, his voice calm, lethal, carrying across the hall. "Then listen carefully. The future of this company, this family, and this empire begins with her." Gasps rippled again, and as his words carved through the chaos, I realized we were no longer fighting whispers. We were standing against history itself. The boardroom was a battlefield long before we stepped inside, but that morning it felt like walking into a lion's den. 12 directors sat stiff in their leather chairs, their eyes like blades, their whispers sharper than any knife. The financial reports glowed red on the screen behind them. Stock prices plummeting, partnerships dissolving, a billion-dollar empire trembling on the edge. And all of it, according to them, was my fault. "You've jeopardized everything," one of them spat, slamming his fist onto the polished table. "You chose scandal over stability, infatuation over duty. Step down before you drag us all into ruin." Others murmured in agreement, their disdain thick enough to suffocate me. I sat frozen, every nerve screaming that I didn't belong here, that this room was built to crush intruders like me. But Juno didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze a storm barely restrained. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "This company is on the edge, but it's not because of her." He stood abruptly, pointing at the screen, then at the men who dared question him. "It's because you've forgotten what power is. Power isn't just money or numbers. It's loyalty, vision, trust. And I will protect her because she is the only person in this room who has never lied to me." The silence that followed was volcanic, pressure building without release. They expected him to bend, to abandon me for their empire. Instead, he drew a line of war across the polished floor. And for the first time I realized this wasn't just about love anymore. This was about survival. The moment we left that suffocating boardroom, the world outside pounced like a beast unchained. Flashing cameras blinded us, microphones shoved in our faces, questions shouted like bullets. Is the wedding cancelled? Who is she really? Are you betraying your shareholders? Every word was designed to cut, to draw blood, to paint me as the villain. Juno wrapped his arm protectively around me, shielding me as though his body alone could silence the chaos. But the crowd only grew louder, hungrier, each accusation echoing like thunder. Just as my knees threatened to give out, a sharp voice cut through the madness, one I hadn't heard in years. Step away from him. The crowd parted, and there she was, Madame Huang, Juno's estranged mother, dressed in a crimson hanbok that glowed like fire under the camera lights. Her eyes locked onto mine, cold and unyielding. With a single gesture, she commanded silence. Even the press hesitated, their frenzy dimming under the weight of her authority. Juno's hand tightened around mine, but his jaw set like stone. He knew what was coming. She is not worthy, Madame Huang declared, her voice slicing through the night air. If you choose her, Juno, then you are no longer my son. Gasps erupted, the crowd surging with renewed frenzy. Cameras clicked like gunfire, immortalizing the ultimatum. And in that split second, as Juno stood caught between blood and love, empire and freedom, I realized this war had only begun.